Good evening, friends. Let us be still a moment and turn within. What if the most important appointment on a traveling salesman's calendar wasn't across a desk, but in the sanctuary of his own silence? Tonight we walk beside a man who carried samples in a case and discovered a presence he could not pack away. This is the story of the traveling salesman who became a mystic. Joel Goldsmith's transformation. Amid the clatter of train stations and the quiet of hotel rooms, something unseen began to whisper, not a philosophy to memorize, but an inner assurance to rest in. The figures in his ledger gave way to a new arithmetic of grace. He learned that supply is not shipped but realized, that peace is not earned but uncovered, and that the road we travel becomes sacred when we turn within and listen. So take a breath with me now. Let the mind grow quiet. There is a still point here where the outer journey ends and the inner journey begins. The same presence that met Joel in ordinary places is here, inviting us to step through the familiar into the infinite. What happened in that unremarkable room that opened an extraordinary life? And how did one simple moment of awareness turn a wary salesman into a witness of the invisible? Stay with me, and we will enter that room together. If this message resonates, please like the video. Comment a symbolic number 777 or 1111 to say I'm listening, and subscribe so we can walk this path together. We step quietly into that room, a hotel room that could have been anywhere, with its thin carpet, its radiator whispering, the city murmuring beyond the glass. On the table a worn appointment book lay open, figures marching in neat little columns, tomorrow's miles circled in pencil. This was the life he knew. Trains caught by minutes, sales won by pressure, a day chased and then chased again. The mind lived on the surface, arranging, persuading, comparing, always reaching for the next hand to shake, the next promise to frame just so. And yet, between the last phone call and the click of the lamp, something else showed itself, a space that did not ask for anything, no argument, no pleading, no plan, just an inner hush, fragile at first, like a breath held and then recognized as one's own. He had not earned it. He had not readed it into being. It was simply there when he stopped pushing. Patient, immediate, utterly itself. From outer hustle to inner hush, that was the pivot. Not a withdrawal from life, but a different center in life. He discovered that the strain in his shoulders was not the weight of work, but the weight of self-importance. The belief that results were produced by personality and technique. In the hush, that belief loosened. Words came unforced, timing arranged itself, people met him where he truly was, and sometimes astonishingly, needed nothing but that quiet recognition. He began to test it. Before a doorway he paused. Before a price was named, he listened. Not to the customer's objections, what of those would be answered, but to the still current beneath appearances. He found there a presence that did not argue, did not hustle, did not compete. Standing in that inner room, he was no longer trying to make anything happen. He was letting the real happen, the natural order that appears when we stop insisting. The calendar did not change, the cities were the same, the trains kept their schedules. But the man on those trains was different. He rode in the same seat with a new awareness, as if the moving car had become a sanctuary. He discovered that a few minutes of true stillness could redeem hours of motion, that one clear awareness could accomplish what a day of nervous effort could not, that resting in the invisible did more than wrestling with the visible. This hush grew faithful. It met him in noisy lobbies and in quiet mornings. It taught him that prayer is not words, but alignment, not asking, but recognition, not striving, but yielding. It taught him that supply is felt, not fetched, and that peace is known, not negotiated. And when fear would rise, the old fear of quotas, of months closing, of being behind, he learned to let the fear be seen without being believed, to return to the center where the burden lifts of itself. What changed outwardly appeared simple. He became kinder, less hurried, more direct. But what changed inwardly was far more radical. The sense of a separate door began to dissolve. In that dissolving, life could move through him without obstruction, conversations softened, decisions clarified. Even disappointments arrived with meaning that outlived the moment. He was discovering a laws when the heart is quiet, what the day orders itself. From that simple ordering arose a recognition what he had credited to luck, charm, or timing was the sign of an unseen current carrying the day. He would pause, and the right person appeared. He would listen, and the unnecessary argument dissolved. The more he rested in the quiet, the more clearly he sensed a life acting that did not begin in his will, yet included him in its ease. He named this presence the infinite invisible. Not distant, but immediate, not an abstraction, but a felt reality. In that awareness, supply, changed meaning. It was no longer inventory, commissions, or balances. It was the effortless sufficiency that follows recognition of source. He stopped bargaining for outcomes and began consenting to the rhythm already moving through everything. On a day when a missed connection once meant panic, he waited in stillness and sat beside a stranger whose single conversation opened a district of receptive contacts. On another, a competitor withdrew from a bid he expected to lose, and an anxious client calmed before he framed a persuasive phrase. Again and again, the quiet led, what events arranged themselves around it. He learned the difference between form and source. Money, opportunities, introductions. Forms, changing and interchangeable. The source one, changeless, inexhaustible. A sale lost did not equal supply lost, because supply was presence recognized, not payment received. Measuring provision by inner freedom rather than totals, he found that the freer he became from counting, the more naturally the needed forms counted themselves. Guidance shifted from anxious seeking to simple noticing. It rarely arrived as voices or omens, but as a clean sense of rightness. When desire dressed up as leading, there was heat and haste. When the infinite invisible moved, there was openness and unforced timing. He would wait past the tremor of wanting until transparency returned, then knock on an unplanned door, take the later train, refuse a glittering proposal, or pick up the phone after a nudge as gentle as a feather. Harmony, not flattery, confirmed the step. He began recognizing supply in forms numbers ignore. A fresh idea precisely when needed, strength after a sleepless night, patience that softened a stubborn exchange, forgiveness that reopened a stalled account. The ledger stopped dictating reality. It became a report, not a prophecy, or the old pressure of not enough lost its argument before a presence that kept proving itself as sufficiency, here and now. When a month ran thin, he resisted the reflex to grab and push. He kept to the stillness and found the day bringing him to a small gathering where he spoke, almost by accident, about the inner hush. A single meeting from that evening drew him toward a field of service he had not imagined, and with it came the resources and direction he had thought he must chase. Practice simplified into a rhythm: turn within, recognize, and then move. Before letters, before calls, before stepping onto a sidewalk, a moment of yielding to the invisible that is ever present. The outer plan remained useful, but no longer tyrannized. Action grew from rest, and the day unfolded as if the path were quietly being cleared a few steps ahead. The outer plan remained useful, but no longer tyrannized. Action grew from rest, and the day unfolded as if the path were quietly being cleared a few steps ahead. In that clearing, he learned that silence itself was prayer, not a preface to prayer, but prayer fulfilled. He set down words as one sets down a tool when the work is finished, and let the listening do the speaking. He would close his eyes in a station or on a bench and simply become available, not to thought, but to presence. He noticed that whenever he pleaded, he tightened. Whenever he rested, he received. So he stopped trying to convince the invisible and offered consent instead, a simple inward yes that needed no sentences to support it. At first the mind rebelled. It threw up lists, worries, and rehearsals. He did not fight it. He let the noise exhaust itself like rain on a roof while he attended to the quiet beneath the weather. Breath became a bell ringing him back. Inhale, soften, exhale. Release. He would not hunt for experiences. He would not perform holiness. He practiced being unhurried, even if the clock insisted otherwise, trusting that depth, or not duration, opened the way. He began to treat the day as a string of altars, doorways, telephones, sidewalks, each one an invitation to pause and return. 5 seconds of honest stillness before a knock did more than 5 minutes of strategy. The pause was not superstition, it was alignment. In it, he found that the presence did the lifting. The burden of outcomes slid off the shoulders of a person and dissolved into a field where right action was already given. Awareness became his practice. Not self-consciousness which shrinks, but God-consciousness which frees. He trained his attention to recognize the subtle shift from strain to ease, from argument to assurance, and to stand on the side of assurance even while sensations argued. When fear named a problem, he refused to answer to the name. He acknowledged appearances without bowing to them, turning again to the felt certainty that what is real is already complete and cannot be threatened by what is noisy. He discovered that true prayer has no agenda except communion. If he entered silence to get something, the silence thinned. If he entered to be with what is, it deepened and spread. Out of that depth, phrases sometimes arose, not as demands, but as recognition. Here you are, I know, thank you. Often not even words, just a warmth, a clarity, a rightness that needed no description. He learned to stop when that rightness came and not to add a single thought, as one stops talking when the sun breaks through a window. This practice traveled with him into conversations. While a customer spoke, he listened twice, once to the words and once to the quiet that holds all words. He noticed which responses kept the quiet intact and which fractured it, and he followed the intactness. Silence became the atmosphere of his speech, the space that let truth be heard without insistence. In that atmosphere, even disagreement softened, and solutions appeared that neither party had planned. He saw awareness was not a task on the list, but the light by which the list is seen, and duty quietly warmed into devotion there. In that devotion, the center of action shifted. He noticed how much of his former effort had been spent propping up an image of competency, tightening every screw, rehearsing every line, bracing against the possibility of lack. When devotion replaced duty, the tightening eased. He did not become passive, he became permeable. Instead of pushing, he let himself be moved. The actions looked similar, calls made, letters written, steps taken. But the tone was different. What once felt like a climb now felt like a current. He sensed that the real effectiveness of any deed was not in the deed, but in the life flowing through it. When the doer stepped aside, he began quietly to withdraw belief from the personal I. The old identity, the one that claimed the credit and feared the blame, was seen as a mask useful for the stage of human dealings and otherwise laid down. He did not despise skill. He redeemed it by placing it in service to something larger than self-advancement. A sentence offered with grace achieved more than a paragraph defended by anxiety. He could prepare without worshipping preparation, show up holy, and yet hold the outcome in open hands. In the midst of activity, he felt a stillness that did the real work, like a deep river beneath a rippling surface. There were moments when habit returned, an inner tightening, a rush toward control. He learned to notice the first twitch and stop, breathe, then watch as the invisible order reassembled the moment. Instead of pleading for a rescue, he acknowledged what is already true, that sufficiency is present as presence. Results came, sometimes quickly, sometimes later, but he grew less interested in the calendar of appearances and more absorbed in fidelity to grace in the instant at hand. He saw that what the world calls miracle is simply the naturalness of spirit when interference subsides. The contrast between striving and grace clarified itself in relationships. Where he once pressed, he now recognized. Where he once argued, he bore witness to what was right in the other person until it answered. He felt no need to win, and therefore he often did. He could let a transaction pass without fear because he trusted the source beneath all forms. In releasing the anxiety of getting, he discovered the abundance of giving, attention that truly listens, kindness that does not calculate, patience that stays because it is upheld from within. These were not moral achievements, they were the fragrance of a presence increasingly felt. Failures, too, lost their sting. A plan that fell through no longer indicted his worth. It simply revealed a path not taken because a truer one was opening. Praise and criticism touched the surface but did not penetrate the quiet. He found that grace provided not only outcomes but interpretation. It gave him eyes to see events without the distortion of fear. Even fatigue changed character. It signaled rest rather than guilt, and rest proved as productive as labor when taken in obedience to the inner rhythm. He discovered a Lord. Effort born of separation drains, action born of union replenishes. The more he yielded, the more capacity appeared. Clarity in pressure, gentleness in confrontation. A surprising creativity that solved problems before they hardened. He trusted the unspectacular steps grace often chooses: a timely word, a delayed train, a sudden thought to turn left instead of right. He allowed grace to decide the scale of his service and ceased measuring impact by visibility. What mattered was fidelity to the flow, which is its own fulfillment, and in that fidelity the personal, I grew quiet enough to let the infinite live its life as this very day, and as day met day on the same streets. The commonplace began to shine. The pavement he had hurried across for years felt different beneath his feet, as if it knew him and welcomed him. The elevator bell, the hiss of steam, the clink of cups at a counter, sounds he had ignored became part of a liturgy not written in any book. A cheap hotel room, first light passing through crooked blinds, turned soft and consecrated. He was not seeking special places. He was meeting the presence in ordinary ones and finding that the ordinary, seen rightly, cannot remain ordinary. He discovered holiness is not produced by mood or ceremony, it is recognized by removing the sandals of urgency. He would lay aside the mind's shoes, the hard soles of hurry, anxiety, self-importance, and stand bare in awareness, just where he was. The desk became an altar when he approached it without demand. The sample case was a reliquary when touched with gratitude. Stamping envelopes, lacing shoes, writing names, the smallest motions were no longer filler between real moments. They were the sacrament of this breath, this task, this presence that asked only to be acknowledged. Travel did not separate him from the sacred, it displayed it. A night train, with the wash of dark fields beyond the window, the faint reflection of his face overlaid with stars. Sanctuary. A station bench shared with a drowsy porter. Sanctuary. He learned to recognize appointments that did not appear in his calendar, a conversation with a cab driver whose story opened a tenderness he didn't know he carried, a delay at a crossing that interrupted his plan and delivered him to an unexpected kindness, a waitress's wary smile that brightened as he saw her, truly saw her, and silently blessed the room. Interruptions turned from irritants into messengers. He began to suspect that the infinite invisible prefers doorways people think are small. He moved through the day not as a seeker of advantage, but as a witness to what is already present. Blessing ceased to be a phrase and became a way of seeing each face as a window, each task as a chance to embody the ease he had found within. He did not preach in the aisles or quote texts at counters. He listened, and in listening, the quiet did its work. A complaint softened without argument. A misunderstanding untied itself. The line at the bank shortened as patience spread. He discovered that reverence expressed itself in practical courtesies, letting another go first, speaking the truth without sharpness, returning excess change without fanfare, writing a note of thanks before there was any debt to settle. Geography lost its hierarchy. Cathedrals were beautiful, but so was a stoop where a child drew spirals in chalk. So was the back room of a shop with dust motes turning like slow planets. So was the rain pooling in a rut and reflecting a torn piece of sky. He remembered the old story of a bush that burned without consuming and understood any bush burns when the eye is clear. He recalled the ladder seen in a dream with angels ascending and descending, and understood commerce itself can be that ladder when the heart is awake. He did not wait for a distant hour to be holy. He breathed, looked, and found the name present where his foot touched ground, and the ground answered back with a quiet he could trust. From that trust, he was shown his true office, to witness, not to do. The compulsion to manage outcomes softened, and a new stance emerged. Beholding, he discovered that when he stood quietly in the awareness of the infinite invisible, life proceeded with a wisdom no strategy could reproduce. He did not withdraw from action, he withdrew from the belief that personal action is the cause, and the doer grew transparent, and through that transparency the work worked. He practiced this beholding in small, exact ways. Before entering a room, he paused to recognize the one presence as the reality of every person there. Not a buyer, a seller, a skeptic, or an ally, but an expression of the same life that breathed him. In that recognition, pressure dissolved. He could speak plainly without pushing, listen without maneuvering, say yes or no without the tremor of gain or loss. Results followed, but he no longer chased them. He witnessed the harmony already present and let forms arrange themselves around that fact. He learned the principle of no power. He stopped setting truth against error, as if two forces were in contest. If the invisible is all, then what appears as obstruction is not a rival power. It is a shadow without substance in the light of realization. So he did not take up mental arms. He turned within until fear's argument lost its voice, and the peace that does not argue stood revealed. From that seeing, difficulties either dissolved or were met with an ease that made them light. Realization replaced demonstration as the point. When he sought demonstration, his practice thinned into techniques. When he rested in realization, simply knowing God is here, demonstrations appeared as byproducts, a timely payment, a healed misunderstanding, strength returning between one breath and the next. He came to trust that the fruit ripens without his pulling on it, that the tree bears by its nature when rooted in living soil. He also learned to impersonalize. A difficult person was not a fixed identity, but a suggestion asking for belief. He refused the suggestion and chose to behold the presence where irritation seemed to be. Often nothing needed to be said aloud. The atmosphere changed because the witness changed. If words were given, they were gentle and exact, arising from the quiet like a clear bell. And because they were not aimed, they landed true. There were days when nothing outward signaled success. He sat in a simple chair, felt the mind offer problems to solve, and did not take them up. He abided. He noticed that a letter he had planned to write no longer felt right to send, and the next morning a phone call arrived that made it unnecessary. He noticed that a meeting he thought he needed to arrange fell away, and in its place a providence unfolded he could not have assembled. He watched, not passively, but receptively, the way a sailor watches the wind to set his sail. He began to sense the inner wordless prayer moving through speech and silence alike. Sometimes the highest fidelity meant speaking, sometimes it meant letting the silence complete the sentence. He stopped measuring faithfulness by volume and measured it by intactness, the felt unbrokenness of presence through the exchange. He recognized that when he guarded that intactness, even within, the outer scene conformed to it with surprising speed. The sense of time loosened. He was less interested in futures and more faithful to now, because now was the only place realization could be known. As he lived this way, people felt rested in his company, as if they could put down something heavy without understanding why. He did not fix them. He witnessed the wholeness already theirs, and many found themselves quietly agreeing with it. The witness, not the will, did the lifting, and the day, given back to the invisible, moved of itself with a grace that needed no announcement.